is murdering someone. Kill them all.
The voices told me to kill my wife. The voices forced me. The serial killer claimed the voices made him commit murder. They demanded that I murder my father. These were just a few examples of articles that Mateo had read repeatedly over the past few months. It didn't matter what the crime was or in which country it occurred. Whenever mysterious voices were mentioned, Mateo followed the story. He tried to uncover all the details, not out of curiosity, not because of his interest in crime and wrongdoing, but simply because the voices came to him, voices that no one else could hear. Mateo was 25 and he was born in one of the border towns of Mexico. Among his friends, he was known for his courage and fearlessness, as he was not afraid of anything. He had seen the most terrifying things at the age of 8 when he woke up to his mother, Salma, heading towards the hallway with a huge stone board in her hands. Salma stood over her perpetually drunk husband, lying on the floor, then lifted the stone and struck it on his head. Afterward, she sat above his head and kept stabbing her to make sure he would never get up again. Mateo loved his mother and had witnessed her being beaten by his father many times. That's why not only did he help his mother bury his father's corpse in the backyard that night, but he also never revealed her secret. However, when for the first time he stepped into the house on the hill, he realized that others knew their secret. People he couldn't see, but their voices haunted him. A year ago, when Mateo went to the town where his mother lived as usual to celebrate the Day of the Dead together, he hadn't heard from her in over a month. In their last conversation, Salma happily mentioned finding a stable job with a good salary. However, a week later, Salma stopped answering Mateo's calls, and the few short messages exchanged between them remained unanswered. Salma didn't even give him her workplace address, but with persistent inquiries, Mateo managed to find it, a large old house with an architectural style dating back over 100 years. As soon as he stepped out of the car, he noticed Salma staring at him from behind the ground floor window. However, unlike usual, she showed no reaction to seeing Mateo. The closer he got, the more he realized the strange condition of his mother. In less than 2 months since Mateo last saw her, Salma had become paler and more worn out, with disheveled hair and a face that seemed filled with fear. She uttered only one sentence to Mateo: "Go away and never come back." Then she pulled the curtain and ignored Mateo's knocks and pleas. In that moment, Mateo couldn't comprehend the transformation in his mother's expression and her unusual behavior, but one thing was clear. The house before him, the one on the hill, held the key. Little did he know that in a few days, he would confront his own horror within its walls. The Day of the Dead had arrived, yet there was no sign of Salma. When Mateo returned to his apartment downtown, the elevator was, as usual, out of order, forcing him to climb the stairs to his 4th-floor home. His preoccupied thoughts about his mother prevented him from noticing someone in the shadows under the staircase. However, something strange on the 3rd-floor stairs caught his attention. Intrigued, Mateo bent down to look below and was surprised. Salma, barefoot and in a trance, was coming up the stairs, whispering incomprehensible words under her breath. As the timed lights went out, plunging everything into darkness, Mateo reached for his phone to turn on the flashlight. The squelched sound of his approaching mother intensified with each passing moment. When the flashlight revealed Salma's battered and bruised feet just a step away, Mateo shone the light on her face. Salma remained silent momentarily, her frightened gaze fixed on Mateo, before she began uttering incoherent sentences. "Salma, there's no God or no one is helping us, maybe only death. I wanted to see you for the last time." Mateo couldn't make sense of his mother's seemingly unrelated and meaningless statements, and his attempts to calm Salma were in vain. Suddenly, Salma's gaze shifted behind Mateo, her face contorted with fear. Bewildered, Mateo turned the light behind him to see that there was nothing. Upon redirecting the light to Salma, he discovered she had distanced herself, gripping the staircase railing. Her final statements added another layer of mystery. "Salma, your father has returned. As long as I'm alive, he won't let go." Upon completing her sentence, Salma, before Mateo's shocked eyes, threw herself headfirst from the staircase railing to the ground below. The haunting sound of her mother's head hitting the floor and cracking lingered in Mateo's mind for weeks after the burial. During those days, Mateo had only one explanation for all of this: Salma's tormenting guilt over the ruthless murder of her husband. However, sometime later, on the night he got intoxicated by the grief of his mother's death and went to the hilltop house to collect her last belongings, he realized there was something else to the story. That night, a young girl opened the door for him whom Mateo had only seen once and didn't even know her name. The first thing that caught his attention in the house were the painful cries coming from the second floor. The same person the young girl was taking care of. Mateo went to his mother's room and immediately noticed the unusual state of the room. The windows were covered with newspapers, fabric, and anything available, exactly like the mirror on the bathroom table. Wooden crosses were installed on all four walls of the room, filled with counterspell prayers that Salma had written with charcoal. Strangest of all was the single bed in the room where Salma slept. The bed was pulled to the center of the room, and a salt circle was drawn around it, a circle that Mateo had been familiar with since childhood and knew its meaning well, preventing demonic forces from approaching. And finally, a picture of himself was placed on the table, surrounded by several counterspell prayers. 2 candles, completely melted, were also noticeable. Had his mother gone insane? Or was something in that house terrorizing her? This was a question that Mateo asked the young nurse, but she had just arrived there and had never seen Selma. During the 10 days she worked there, nothing unusual had happened, except for one incident. A new caretaker had replaced Selma, who had left the house without any reason or notice on the same day. The nurse had to stay there overnight. Meanwhile, the sound of someone crying on the second floor, louder and more unusual than what Mateo had heard when entering the house, caught his attention. Mateo wanted to help, but the nurse wouldn't allow him to go to the second floor and only said one sentence: "She doesn't want anyone to see her." The sentence wasn't even finished when the sound of a clock without hands rang 3 times, and Mateo realized it was past midnight. A few days later, Mateo learned that his mother wasn't insane, and those prayers and counterspells had a reason. It all started with the sound of a buzzing noise in his ears, which Mateo heard 2 days after his return from the hilltop house. It didn't seem like a significant issue and was considered normal. His friends told him that medical examinations showed no problems, and his hearing was perfectly fine. But over time, the annoying sound intensified until one night it was replaced by strange, eerie, patchy noises that haunted him for a moment. The sounds didn't belong to a single person. They were strange noises as if coming from the depths of hell, the screams of men and women as if they were suffering torment, or bizarre and terrifying laughter. These voices mocked Mateo, calling him a murderer and revealing everything about him and his mother. Worst of all was the voice of his father, begging Mateo to bring him out from under the ground. But it wasn't just the voices. Gradually, Mateo saw things that explained the strange condition of his mother's room, why all the windows were covered, and what the circle was supposed to catch. Mateo didn't know what stared at him every night from behind the window in his room, nor did he understand its intentions. However, from the very first nights after returning from the hilltop house, He felt its presence until the night he finally entered the house. That night, Mateo lay on his bed and noticed two eyes staring at him from behind the curtain. But this time, there was a difference. The figure wasn't behind the window. Mateo stayed in his place to get a better look, and something happened when his gaze fell on the male legs covered by the curtain. The person behind the curtain slowly approached Mateo, and as the curtain that covered him gradually moved aside, he was fully revealed. It was his father, with a disfigured face and a decaying body, attempting to speak, but his shattered jaw and mouth prevented it, standing in front of him. Despite the disturbing sight, Mateo wasn't afraid of what he saw until, in the end, one thing surrendered him to the voices: the repetition of the scene of his mother's suicide, which drove Mateo to the brink of madness. Mateo didn't want and couldn't reveal the entire truth to Sam and Elias. He never mentioned what the voices demanded from him in exchange for keeping the house's secret, and it was a secret only he knew. Mateo knew nothing about the past of the Hilltop House and its previous residents. He only knew one thing: the curse of the house would never disappear, and the only way to escape it was to bring other people to that house. It was a cycle that had repeated for years. That's what the voices had told him, and it seemed to make sense. After Mateo brought Eric and his friends to that house, the voices disappeared forever. And the same happened to Eric and Martin after Sarah and her friends entered the house. Sam was now convinced that the person they needed to find was May, as she had organized the party, and she must have known the secret of the house. However, Elias had doubts. The night they went to the party, he accompanied May, and he had no doubt that it was May's first time visiting that house. Not only did she get lost once on the way, but May, unlike others who had been to the house, seemed perfectly normal that night. Also, there were strangers among them that night that no one recognized. To gather more information, Sam showed Mateo a group photo from the party, hoping to identify someone who might have answers or be a potential threat. May, being the party organizer, could be the target of someone seeking her or attempting to escape their own nightmares. Despite their efforts, Mateo couldn't recognize anyone in the photo. So the focus shifted to the young nurse Mateo had noticed that night, the potential source of answers. Her name was Isabel, the nurse of the last survivor of the 1975 fire at the house on the hill.